What's going on, everybody? It's Greg. Going to do a quick fun video today. Man, this is good stuff. How about Psalm 91? This is a verse that I've probably heard more often in a Fred Hammond song than any other place, but just was thinking about this today and some good stuff came to me. I wanted to share it with you. Psalm 91:1. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to Yahweh, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. What a powerful verse that just begs to be dug into. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High. What does it mean to dwell? It means to sit down somewhere that you're going to remain or settle. I love that. In the shelter of the Most High. And the word here for shelter is cover. I want to focus on that. Someone who sets themselves, who parks in the cover of the Almighty, under His shelter, in a secret place, in the hiding place of the Most High, will abide. And that word abide means to stay permanently. If you will set down, just set yourself and take up residence in the shelter, in the cover of Yahweh, then you will permanently be in the shadow of the Almighty. And that word shadow is really shade. Shade as in protection. Very cool verse. Let's go to Psalm 32:7. You are a hiding place for me. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with shouts of deliverance. Selah. Some similar words here. David saying, Yahweh, you are a hiding place. Here it is again. You're a cover for me. You preserve me from trouble. To preserve is to guard or protect or maintain. You keep me. You surround me with shouts of deliverance. In this passage, he's saying, you're a hiding place for me. You protect me. You surround me. You just get this sense of defense, like Yahweh is just covering you and protecting you. I was thinking about that passage from Psalms, and I started thinking about the beach. I'm not a big fan of the beach per se, but my wife loves it. She loves to go out there on the beach and just sit for hours and lay in the sun and sweat. Man, I can't hardly stand it. If we're going to the beach, I am taking either an umbrella, if that's the only thing I can bring. My preference is I'm going to bring one of those sunshades or a camping tent and set up, especially if we're going to be out there for any period of time. I want a shadow. I want some protection. And you think about the beach and being at the sun, it is a hostile environment. Ladies can't hear that, I know, but the sun is blasting you. It is pumping that radiation down on you. And if you stay unprotected in this environment, then you will get sunburned. You have to have some protection. You have to have something that's covering you, or you can't stay there. But if you do have protection, if you've got shade, then you can be in this hostile environment, for me anyway, and you can actually enjoy yourself. You can get out a Kindle and read a great book or something like that, whatever you like to do at the beach. But just thinking about that you know, the sun is going to hurt you if you're out there in it and you don't have any kind of protection. But so it begs the question, what does it mean to be in the shadow of the Almighty, or how do you get under His shelter or in His shelter? I had two different ways of looking at this, and I'm interested in hearing your opinion in the comments. Take a look at Exodus 15:26. Perhaps there is a supernatural and a natural explanation for this. I want to see what you think. So, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of Yahweh your God and do that which is right in His eyes. Remember that phrase. We're going to see something similar to that here shortly. Do that which is right, which is defined as giving ear to His commandments and keeping all his statutes. If you do that, if you do these things which are right in his eyes, then I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am Yahweh your healer. So here, this sounds like a supernatural protection. If you obey, then I will not put any of those diseases on you that I did put on the Egyptians. That sounds like a divine intervention, which may be obvious, but now I want to go to a chapter that may be a little more familiar to you, and that's Deuteronomy 28. It says, if you faithfully obey the voice of Yahweh your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, Yahweh your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of Yahweh your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. That's another reference to a Fred Hammond song, which is what kind of got me started down this rabbit trail. But notice it says, these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you. And I like what this word means here. It means to reach. So all these blessings will, let me scroll down just a little bit, they will be able to reach you, to be able to secure reach or have enough. If you are obedient, then these blessings will have the ability to grab a hold of you. They'll be able to reach you. You will be in a place where they can get to you, okay? You're probably already figuring out where I'm going with this. Let me scroll down just a little bit to verse 15. Fred Hammond didn't mention this in his song, and I'm not surprised as to why, but it says, if you will not obey the voice of Yahweh your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses, same verbiage, shall come upon you and overtake you. All these curses, cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the field. Okay, it says they'll overtake you, or they will be able to get to you. Go back to the beach analogy. If you're out there, that UV radiation can get to you. It will be able to reach you, and you'll be able to feel the curse because of your disobedience or your lack of protection, because you didn't put yourself in the shadow of the Almighty, in the shelter of the Most High, because you didn't get in where you're protected from these things, where you're, as David says in the other place in Psalms, preserved from trouble, then these curses can come upon you. So the question I have for you, something to think about or consider, is this only a supernatural thing? Is it only a natural thing? If you obey the commandments, you'll be blessed. If you disobey, you'll be cursed. If you're obeying the commandments, you are in the shelter of the Most High. You are abiding in the shadow of the Almighty. And I'll prove that with Scripture in other places too. But just think about that analogy. For example, you shall not commit adultery. You know, one of the 10 commandments that everybody knows. Okay, you're cursed if you break that commandment. Paul reminds us that the wages of sin is death, still is death. Even after Yeshua died on the cross, the wages of sin still are death. And sin is the transgression of the law, according to 1 John 3:4. So if you break the law, there is still a penalty, and there's still a curse of sin and death. Well, ultimately, it will lead to death if you disobey it. So here's the question. Is there only a natural protection in obeying the commandments? In other words, if you commit adultery on your wife, then you're gonna, she will find out. It will come out. You'll wreck your marriage. You'll be depressed and miserable. You'll live by yourself, or you'll live with guilt and regret for what you did. You might get divorced, and if you have children, you don't get to see them as often. You lose half your possessions, yada, yada, yada. I mean, that certainly sounds like a curse. Is that a supernatural thing, or is it a natural thing? As in saying, taking an umbrella to the beach will protect you from sunburn. Is that supernatural? No, that's not. Is it just simply saying, look, if you abide in the shadow of the Almighty, the shelter of the Most High, then you will be protected from all these things. And that means keeping the commandments. Let's go to John chapter 15 and look at what Yeshua himself said in verse 9 and 10. He said, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love." Remember, that's what we started with, that word abide. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. He says in verse 10, "If you keep my commandments," same phrase we were looking at before, "you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things have I spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full." So keeping the commandments means you are abiding in him, abiding in his love. If you want to abide under the shadow of the Almighty, if you want to dwell in the shelter of the Most High, then keep the commandments and you will be shielded. You will be protected. You'd be crazy not to do this. Let's go to Psalm 23. Super common psalm, looking at it differently after studying this. "Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want." What does it mean to have Yahweh as our shepherd? It means, what does a sheep do with a shepherd? A sheep follows him, listens to him. In fact, in another place we have Yeshua saying, "My sheep hear my voice, and a stranger they will not follow." How many people did Yeshua go out and find and say, "Follow me, follow me"? It's as if, I want you to think of this analogy. We talked about the beach, now we're going to talk about something real bad. Imagine a minefield, that you're in some third world country and there's mines all over. But Yeshua walks the path and you see where he zigzags and cuts and you see every footprint. He knows where the mines are. If he said, "Follow me," then what are you going to do? You're going to put every foot in his footstep that's already there. You're going to be very careful to walk exactly as he walked. You know that Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11:1, he said, "Be an imitator of me as I am of Christ." Let me flip it to King James. "Be followers of me, even as I also am of Christ." So he said, "Follow me because I'm following him." And if you think Paul is going in a different direction, if he's not putting his feet in the footsteps of Yeshua, then you're not following Paul. You're following someone else that you think is Paul, because he said, "Follow me because I'm following him." And we just read in John 15:9 and 10, Yeshua said that he followed the commandments of his Father. So let's go back to, actually, let's jump ahead. This is good stuff. 1 John 2:6. "Whoever says he abides in him," as in Yeshua, who is abiding in the shadow, abiding in his love. If you say you're abiding in him, then you ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. Did he eat pork? No, he did not eat any pork. He obeyed the commandments. Did he keep the Sabbath day? Yes, Yeshua kept the Sabbath day every single Sabbath. Did he keep the feast days? You better believe it. He kept every single one of them. So if that's how Yeshua walked, and if we say we're abiding, if you want to abide in the shadow of the Almighty, then we ought to walk in the same way in which he walked, in the way in which he walked. So let's go back to Psalm 23. I want to continue this. So Yahweh is my shepherd, which means I'm going to follow him. I'm going to hear his voice and do what he says. He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The paths of righteousness. We read a scripture earlier from Exodus that talked about the right way, that obeying the commandments and statutes and judgments and decrees and all of these things, that this was the right way in the eyes of Yahweh. So my shepherd, the good shepherd, Yeshua, he is the shepherd. He leads me in the paths of righteousness. The paths of righteousness are obedience to the commandments. This is what it means to love God with all of my heart, with all of my soul, and with all of my strength. as we taught our kids in our study today, that is following him and walking in the paths of righteousness. Loving your neighbor as yourself, that is the paths of righteousness. It is the Torah. Scrolling down here, verse 6, it says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. You know why goodness and mercy are going to follow me all the days of my life? Because when I look ahead of me, I can see Paul. I can follow Paul when I read his letters, but I look a little bit ahead of Paul, and there I see the Good Shepherd, Yeshua. Ultimately, I'm following him. I can step everywhere that he has stepped. I can obey him and walk in the way that he walked, because I'm following him, because he's my shepherd. And if I look behind me, I can see goodness and mercy, because of course goodness and mercy are going to follow me only because I'm following him. See, if I get out of the shelter, if I get out of the shadow, then I'm going to be exposed to the elements. I'm going to be susceptible to sunburn. I'm going to be out of his will. And like he said with the Egyptians, all those diseases that didn't get on that got on the Egyptians, they can get on me now because I've stepped out of that umbrella, of that shade of his protection. But as long as I'm following him, of course goodness and mercy are following, because you know goodness and mercy are following him. So as long as I'm following him, then they're following me, if that makes sense. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So good, so good. I want to wrap up with Psalm 119, 142, which says, your righteousness is righteous forever, and your law is the truth. Your law is true. In the King James, it says, your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. Thy Torah is the truth. Your law, there it is, Torah, it is the truth. Okay, so his righteousness, the paths of righteousness, walking in the law, it's righteous forever. It didn't change when Yeshua came, still walking the same path. He said that he walked the way his Father told him to walk, and we should walk the way he walked. So one more verse, Psalm 119, 160. The sum, the totality, the whole bunch of the book. Thy word is truth, and every one of your righteous rules endures forever. So if you want to be in the shadow of the Almighty, then you've got to follow him, and that means obeying his commandments, and that means doing the Torah. So let's get in the shelter and let's follow him. Thanks for watching.